right, so
Yeah, why not?
as we were, we'll see if that works. As you guys were just finishing up, so what was the hard part? What was the struggle?
Getting the ending and figuring out what it was.
Okay, so Kat says the ending was the hardest part. That idea of how you pulling it up, how you go about pulling it all together. How many of you in here were struggling with the ending of your pieces? I've got 2 of you, 3 of you, 4 of you, 5 of you, 6 of you. All right, so we have a good chunk of our 21 that endings were an issue. That's interesting. What else we got? What else was the hard part? Shane? Character development. What do you mean by that?
It's like making the character more like lifelike, not just two-dimensional.
So kind of filling out and rounding out some of the personality aspects. So rounding out that person. How, for those of you that you don't, do I have any of you that felt like you did a really good job with that? So what made that easier for you? What were some of the tricks? How did you look at character development?
I based them off of like people I didn't know in real life, people who I've like all I've had kind of tried to like bring across more of a moral concept in a person as opposed to like a character in an event.
So kind of placing them within a context in order to help kind of develop that personality, so letting their actions kind of speak to who they are.
Helps me, like, I don't like to like character as a trait. I just like to give them like actions because then it becomes easier for me to define them as a character as opposed to saying they were considerate. I would rather say like so and so gave their last bit of food to like this person because it just helps me like knowing what they do as opposed to like what they are. Then I can decide who they are later depending on like what they'll do.
Nice. That was actually one of the things we were talking about when we were doing some of the mentor text analysis too, that idea of showing moments rather than telling what they did. Yeah.
So in my story, I did like a lot of action. So my story doesn't have any dialogue, so I was kind of required to do that. And I think it helps with developing the characters. Like you have that action, and you're kind of you don't necessarily have to get inside the character's head if you're just kind of showing what they're doing. Then the reader, like I know Kat's story, like even that little excerpt that we read, it depended a lot upon dialogue, but she's really good at like showing like the action too. So I think she's.
And I was gonna say too, and that style of writing then puts I think that makes it more exciting and puts the onus on the reader too, because it's not you saying to the reader, hey, you're not smart enough to figure out what kind of person this is, and I have to tell you, which is kind of what the direct characterization is. Instead, using that indirect characterization and letting the actions sort of speak loudly for the character. So then, Shane, I'm curious, well, how many else of you said that you struggled with character development too? So I want you to think through, look back at how you were describing characters, John.
Yeah.
Look back at how you were describing the characters. Did you use a lot of action to tell who your characters were? Got some nods. Yeah? Interesting. So what do you think are the types of actions that help develop a character most? Jump in, Kat.
How they speak to other characters and how they speak about those around them.
Okay, so part of that then is kind of like dialogue, and part of that then, like yours is explicitly was like the tone that your characters take.
And how they talk about the world.
Nice. Oh, nice. How they talk about the world around them. Even you would disagree because you didn't have any dialogue, did you? So then, how did you do that?
I did that with a lot of I use a lot of figurative language kind of describe, and I think like the imagery of how you describe a character through that, like comparing them to things, like what you compare them to, definitely helps. And also like just describing not necessarily definitely their actions, but the way that they do the action, and comparing that to things or just describing.
Nice. So even in the way that you describe the action, using those comparisons helps bring it so that it's not just a cliche or like a very straightforward like she jumped or what have you, but it's like that quality of get to the nuance of how she jumped. That helps to build some of that personality. Nice. What do you got, Emma?
Like also how they react to certain events.
And it's interesting because I think you and Kat are kind of saying the same thing. She was talking about it in terms of dialogue, but do you mean in terms of like action and how they were like interpret things?
Dialogue, how they act, how their tone is, like how they react to certain things. Like you'll know a lot about a character, like let's say someone got their drink wrong in a restaurant. You'll know more about a character based on whether they ask for the drink back quietly, whether they drink it anyway because they're too nervous to say anything, whether they find the waiter snapping at them like this, yell at them to come over and say, you got this drink wrong, or whether they just ignore it and then just don't end up taking it later.
Nice. So that sort of actions in the way that people react. So did you instance where like you used that idea of how your character reacted to help develop the character? So, all right, so we've got some ideas on how to develop characters. Let's go back to this one. For those of you that didn't, how many of you did not have trouble pulling the ending together? Because you are the people in the room that I hate, because that's always the hardest part. I get stuck and I don't know how to end. So what's your trick? What do you start with like a outline in mind, or how do you get to the end?
Well, with mine in particular, the reader knows how it ends in the beginning.
Oh, we started with the ending.
Yeah.
All right.
So, it's just kind of like, it's all like the reasons, like why it happened. So he's kind of like, this is what happened, and I'm going to tell you why it happened, and how it happened, and how that affected me, and kind of like a diary.
So you work almost from the back end, and then kind of work your way.
Yeah, because he's
back
trying to
it.
make sense of it all.
Nice. Sebastian, you said you didn't have trouble with the ending either?
No, I had like, it wasn't hard to think of the ending really, but I mean, I don't know, I was kind of confused as to how to make the ending once I got an idea. It was pretty easy.
Again, you started with your ending idea and then had to work your way there.
Yeah, but my ending wasn't like really complex. So like if I worked on something to the end.
Nice. So wait, Shane, when you had your ending in mind too.
Yeah, well, when I plan things, I usually just do like really simple, like character and then general plot, and then I'll go right to the ending so that I know I'm like anticipating towards the end, so that I can build it up like the rest of the story. So like, I'll plan the ending first, and then I'll plan the rest.
How many of you did that? How many of you started with the end in mind when you were writing your piece? A couple of you? 5 of you? 6 of you? 7 of you? Okay, you guys, yours is a totally different animal with the screenplay. But like, because you kind of don't have an end.
Yeah. No, but
You might have an end of the episode.
No,
but-
but like episodes always like tie in.
They close.
Yeah.
They close. There's a close.
I'm really not sure how to do that.
I can imagine.
Like we planned out every scene we want, and we're just not sure how it's gonna make sense to like get the whole episode.
So you have to figure out like the order of events and how you're.
Kind of.
And how to space things out, because you don't know, like,
Just to wrap it up, basically, we're looking at how to end it.
Nice. So I like that, and that you use the word like spacing of events or sequencing, like how to sequence those things. Did any others with the story writing struggle with that?
I didn't struggle with sequence, but I struggled with like how to get to like segue from scene to scene.
Okay, so sequence or segue. That's a good like how you
Sequence wasn't difficult. It was just like how to get from this scene to this scene. So largely all the time when I wrote mine, it would be like a direct introduction or direct line, or like it was like kind of when you watch a movie, you know how there's like a cut from the screen onto a different clip or onto a different thing, like how they'll have in like a lot of British movies from the 90s. That's
Yeah, how
kind
do
of
you-
what I do a lot of the time because I don't know how to segue.
And that's the thing, is like, how do you figure out how to do that on the page? And Sam, you kind of came up with an interesting way of doing that too, because that was when you had characters and you had story, but it was, it was like a puzzle.
Yeah, because I like take notes before I start writing, so I don't forget like the details. And then I like have trouble piecing it together sometimes, so I'll like have scraps of story in my notebook. Like it's a mess.
So you ended up doing almost more like, kind of almost like a character study before you even wrote like the events, like you had to kind of figure out like how it all kind of fit together. I think you're still in the midst of that a little bit too. So hang on, somebody check the event page, see if we've got
any questions posted there, or if you are on the event page and want to post questions. Because it sounds like so far we've kind of got 3 big areas that we would love to get some advice on. I would love to hear from other writers about how they work on that idea of ending, character development, spacing, sequencing.
I had trouble introducing the conflict in a smooth way.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well, I was sort of rushing to get it into the deadline, and I was trying to figure out how to introduce the monster to the story.
So you knew, but
without
you
it
knew
being
at
jumpy.
you knew at the onset that you wanted to have the monster as sort of like the main conflict, but also as the surprise too within the midst of the story.
Yeah.
So then, how do you get there, and how do you do that in a way that is both sort of surprising, but then not also just like, and then there's a monster. So sort of again, it's kind of a sequencing thing a little bit, but that introducing the conflict. Anybody else struggle with the conflict, writing the conflict, the big conflict or the climax of the piece?
I struggle with when trying to run in a good mood into the story, like trying to keep it like keeping them consistent and making it well written. Because like I tend to write pieces in a girl's point of view, and a large deal of them like for a long time I was writing like mostly Victorian fairy tales, so I was using a lot more feminine adjectives. But this is like completely differently written, and it's something really different from what I usually do. So it was a challenge telling a story with like an ugly motif and an ugly kind of theme, but at the same time still make it sound interesting, still make it like put together and everything.
Cool. So it sounds like we've got some big areas that we're still kind of puzzling through and working through. Here's what I'm going to have us do. To kind of, because this is, again, this will be saved, so we can actually use that event page to talk back with people. What I'm going to have you do is if you have a question specifically that you want answered, like, please, dear Lord, some writer, answer this question for me, share it. It'll get saved on the broadcast, and I will also take these along with your questions and post them on the event page. So maybe, hopefully, after lunch, we have a little bit better of a technical going on and can kind of get some feedback. So what are the things you really hope to get answered? Does anyone have a dying, burning question they want to ask a writer and/or editor? I know we posted ours from yesterday. Yeah, jump in, Sam.
What's like a good way to figure out your audience?
What's a good way to figure out your audience? Good, yeah, because we were talking about publication, and we were talking about publication at lunch too. So you've got to know, like, what's the best fit for this piece that I've written? Is this a YA piece? Is this an adult piece? Like, how do you figure that out? That's a good question.
Well, I think you need to know your demographic before you make the book. So, like, otherwise, I mean, you can figure it out after the fact, but it's easier if you know.
Sort of it going into, like, the project, like, who you're writing for.
Like, who your focus is, because then, like, that shapes your mind around, like, how you're going to focus.
Yeah, and part of that was kind of maybe using and relying on a little bit with the mentor text. That's a good question. Any other questions you really want to make sure that we get answered?
Is the piece good or not? Like, can I like want to send it in? Because I need a second opinion. I need to figure out whether this is like, whether I overdid it or not.
Actually, Kat, that is a really, really good question to ask, because before a piece goes to an editor, a lot of writers rely on either writers' workshops, kind of like what we've done in the past, or writing groups, and how do you find those or how you create those outside of school? Like, we've kind of got this artificial setup, like you're in a class and so we get to do it, but when you're not in school, where do you find that the person who's going to go through and revise it, like really revise for you?
I was going to say, even if it is good, it's good, like it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
25 different publishers and push that like that.
Isn't that crazy to think about now too? Yeah.
And but all those publishers were also like,
And so then the other thing is, like, how do you know when to stick with your guns and to stick with something versus when you've been told, like, how does J.K. Rowling know, like, after that 24th rejection, how does she know to try for 25?
destiny.
I
Time
don't know.
machine.
I don't know. Like,
There's,
like, how do you know when it's good?
Because I feel like some pieces you just get like attached to in a way. Like if you're spending so much time on it, like which I assume she did with Harry Potter because it's so long,
And
And,
like
like, series
the
of-
way that she just like brought everything full circle and like strung things through the entire series. Like,
Yeah, so it all comes back around.
Like, I feel like since you put so much work into it, like, she couldn't have just, like,
It wasn't left
it's
to
like-
chance.
It's like things
Not
like
really.
small.
There are too many
We don't have to talk
rules
about
and they never really
That's
explain
not
how
true.
the
There
rules.
are
And that's when we send into Harry Potter. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that discussion that we just had, the questions that we asked about the things that we need help with. I'll post them out there on social media over lunch, and we'll come back via social media, Twitter, and see what we can find. And I am hoping it was a technical difficulty on our part.
Here's how you put a stereotype.
Have a great lunch, folks.
I